Well, Gran Turismo 7 2.0, as they're calling it, has dropped, of course, the November 1.40 update, and we're going to be running through my initial impressions, first thoughts, review, whatever you want to call it, for this update as a whole. We're going to briefly talk about all of the vehicles, the new circuits, new events, new features, various changes that have happened, and, as I said, give my overall thoughts on it, maybe for those who aren't bothering to log in until they've heard more about it, maybe you just haven't had the chance to yet, or even just as a place for us to discuss collectively what we think of it, some of our maybe high points and perhaps for some people low points about the update. For me, I will go ahead and say that I think this is one of the best updates that we've had for GT7. That's quite comfortably easy to say, I think. The only reason why I would say one of the best is because the certain selection of cars in any given update won't necessarily appeal to everyone, and I do think that a number of cars and a number of updates have been fantastic choices in the past, like the Maseratis, the Aston Valkyrie, and others as well. If you put those cars in this update, well, this would have been the best update ever, as far as I'm concerned, but these vehicles are pretty damn cool as well. Of course, we will talk about the Lexus LFA first in a second, because it is the car which a lot of people up there with the C8 Corvette really wanted to see in the game. But to me, this is what Gran Turismo updates, if you're going to do them, should be about. The reason why this stands out as being clearly better, even if you're not enjoying the game as much anymore and maybe coming back to it to try this out, is because there's actual apparent effort put into it. Of course, all updates take an element of effort, but this one clearly shows foresight. It shows that they were trying to make a bigger, a better update that could do more for the player, not just in terms of what it added, but in terms of the amount of use you can get out of what was added. Weekly events, new races, Sophie AI, stuff like that, which has more of a longevity to it, rather than just day one, that's it, and then log off again for a month. Now, for some people, of course, it won't please them, but again, this is my personal thoughts, so that is the summation of what I think. I think it's a great update. I think that it's very reminiscent of some of the GT Sport updates, and of course GT Sport had to make up more ground than 7 did, because 7 had the advantage of pretty much starting off how Sport ended, whereas if you compare the start of 7 to the start of Sport, it was abysmal back then in the days of Sport. So those updates changed a lot more in terms of adding big important circuits like Le Mans and Group C cars and huge things like that. But for now, this one, as I said before, I think the most controversial thing about it might be the choice of a snow track instead of something which we already expected, like Red Rock Valley or Villeneuve. That being said, I wasn't disappointed with the track, even before driving on it, and let's talk about the track first. I think it's actually a pretty damn nice little track. The lap doesn't take too long. In a Group B car, the longest variation is still up around a minute 40, a minute 50 or so it's not particularly long, and it's got quite a nice high-speed flow to it. It reminds me a bit of Chamonix from the older games, and hence why I drove the Peugeot 205 Turbo for part of the review, and there are a number of events here as well. There are 3 different layouts and 6 different variations if you include the forward and reverse versions. You'll see some footage from all 3 of those layouts, at least in one of the rotations that you can have of them. There's one that's kind of like the snow equivalent of an oval, very similar to the, I think it's Blue Moon Bay oval as well, kind of a triangle rather than an oval. There's the full long course, which of course is the most technical and the most enjoyable if you're in a full-on rally car, and it's actually nice for me to see that this is a new circuit where you can actually enjoy a lot. I mean, even in terms of these career mode events, in some cases, like the truck or the Yaris that I use, which was a Pikes Peak build, of course, from my most even recent Special Projects pack. Some won't know what Special Projects is. It's basically my things that I add to the game in terms of replicas of cars and that for players to enjoy, as well as whatever Polyphony gives to us. And now you can use so many of those rally builds that I've been doing on a new track for a change, with some actual new events. Now, speaking of new events, and I'm not done talking about this snow track, of course, yet, Lake Louise, but to talk about the overall events, there are more than 20 new events, and with the way that the new structure is working in terms of weekly challenges and stuff like that, it gives you multiple bonuses, kind of reminiscent of the daily logins. It's not quite done in that way, but it kind of reminds me of that. You can also race against the Sophie AI for much bigger multiplications, only on certain events though.
and that's more of its own thing. It's almost like arcade mode, but with Sophie put in there as well. You'll see some of that in a second when I'm talking about the Nismo 400R. In terms of going back to Lake Louise though, it does of course necessitate new tyres as well, and we have snow tyres now added in the game. They're pretty cheap to fit, and as far as I can tell, you should be able to pretty much fit them to any vehicle that can also have dirt tyres, which is pretty obvious to say. But snow tyres, of course, in practice, they don't really feel any different to dirt tyres, they're just necessary for the track. They're a little bit narrower as well, which looks kind of cool on certain vehicles like the Yaris. And yeah, I'm happy with the track, I like it. It even has a nighttime variation, so again, that's a nice alternate take on a snow track, which we haven't really experienced before in Gran Turismo. And I know for many players snow tracks weren't like top of the want list, but it's something which has been completely overlooked in the past couple of games, so as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty damn nice to see it back. In terms of those new events, there are tons of new challenges, and one of the aspects of challenges which I think could be maybe a little controversial because it's a little repetitive is that there's about like 5 or so weekly challenges that you stack up. You get various bonuses like 100 grand for doing one of them, stuff like that, wherein they will include some events that you've already completed. So some of them will be new events, such as this time around, but for any of us who have already completed most, if not all, of the career mode events that there are to choose from, some of those will be duplicates, which kind of goes without saying. They haven't added enough new events to just keep having something that you've never done before over and over again, but it does at least give you more of a reason to revisit certain events. And I'm actually possibly going to make a video in future about why I think stuff like this is actually more of the key to making a good career mode in a racing game, because I have a lot of thoughts on this, and this update I think has actually solidified some of those thoughts and feelings that I have, so that may be something I revisit in future. For now though, I think it's an excellent step. I know many people were hoping for new missions, new endurance races. Not the case at the moment, unless you count shorter stuff as endurance races, I guess, but we've got new Group 3 events. Interestingly, some have balance of performance applied, even in career mode. There are some which are much wider open. I noticed at least one event that had like a Nissan Super Silhouette racing with road cars, all within certain parameters, so again, that's very reminiscent of the older Gran Turismo games. Pretty cool to see. In terms of the broadness of the new events, they are in every country, so there's at least something in Asia, Europe, and America as well. And one of the things which I personally really like, because it was really annoying to keep going out of the event back to your garage and then back into events every time you wanted to change a car, they've added a button where you can just change the car while you're in the menus of career mode. And that is such a simple thing, you know, another one of those things that should have already been in there really, but it makes it so much easier and so much more convenient, more than anything, to just swap between cars. The event directory has also been added, which is a nice big overview, kind of like the car collection thing in your garage, where you can see all of the events that you've partially completed, etc. So it's like a roadmap in effect. So it means that if you want to quickly look at what you've already done and what you, of course, more importantly, still need to do, it's a much quicker way of doing it than jumping into each section, jumping into each track, and trying to see which spots are left without any trophies. So again, just nice time-saving stuff. In terms of the new license, for full exposure, I have not completed the new license. I haven't actually tried any of the master license section yet, because of course we can't do everything, or at least I couldn't do everything as well as making a video about it in day one. So that is the one major thing that I haven't dropped into yet to check it out. But as I've said, I would be not surprised at all, and I'm sure some can confirm this down below already, as to what prizes you can get from the licenses. Spoilers, I guess. But usually licenses do have some pretty nice prizes, so I would be curious to know what they are. There are new cafe menu books as well. We pretty much always get a couple of those, and new collector's menus also. The collector's ones I always find fairly easy, because the majority of the vehicles I already have. For some players, I would imagine you might need to work on the Red Bull one, because not everyone will have all of the Red Bulls. In terms of prizes, of course, that's always kind of similar-y stuff, or samey stuff, engine swaps, 6-star spins, that kind of usual fare. In terms of the vehicles though, let's jump into that now, because of course there are 7 to talk about. For those who are new to the channel, maybe this is the first video you're watching, I will be talking about every single vehicle in the following week or so on the channel every day, in terms of its own individual review. So if you want super in-depth thoughts on each of them, that is where to come. For now, I'm going to keep it brief on each one. Of course, we'll kick it off, like I said, with the Lexus. Incidentally, you will need quite a hefty 4.35 million credits to buy all 7 cars, and the majority of that is actually just from a couple of vehicles. Interestingly, one of them is actually the Nismo, which I wasn't expecting, so kind of crazy because it's a Hagerty collection vehicle. 3 of these are in the Hagerty Legendary Dealer: the Nismo, the 190e Mercedes, and unsurprisingly the Dodge Charger. In terms of overall pricing, individual pricing, they vary quite a bit. The Nismo though is the most surprising to me. 1.8 million credits is insane to me for the Nismo 400R. I know that the Hagerty stuff is based on real life prices. I would have never guessed that a Nismo 400R would be worth 1.8 million in real life. I don't know what kind of currency that's supposed to be in, but the Charger is about, 160 grand, I think. The Mercedes is about 300,000. Very believable for those, but yeah, the Nismo is kind of crazy. And then also, of course, the Lexus is going to be expensive, but the Lexus is in the Lexus dealership. Interestingly, the approach that they've taken to the LFA is actually to mirror real-life used prices, though, which is something I thought they might do, because obviously when the LFA first came out, I believe it was something like a 300 grand car, whereas now they're worth like $1 million, and the Lexus is 1.5 million from the Lexus dealership. So not all players will have enough cash to get that, but if you just do some of the career mode events and time trials and stuff like that, you can earn it pretty quick. Or of course just use one of my grinding tunes at Le Mans and you'll get it in no time. The LFA is great. If you were looking forward to it, I would actually go so far as to say, and this is a bold statement, I would say the Lexus LFA is actually a car which was worth wanting more than the C8 Corvette. And I'm sure there are people who will disagree with that, but to me, I always suspected that a lot of these people who really wanted the C8 Stingray were going to be disappointed when they actually had it, because it's not like it's going to reinvent the wheel. It's a good car, but it's not the best thing around. Whereas with the LFA, because we used to have it, you already know what you're getting. That lovely sounding engine, it does sound good in the game as well. It's lovely to drive, even stock. I'm looking forward to tuning all of these cars, of course, and some of them will have special projects. Very cool to see that you can fit the actual Nürburgring Edition parts, including the chin splitter and the wing, to the LFA, which is a very nice touch. Again, perhaps for special projects. And of course, for a car that is so important to the player base, the stakes are very high. So if they made it bad, or if it ended up being bad, it would be odd, but yeah, you won't be disappointed. If you haven't logged in yet, you will like the LFA. Next up, let's talk about probably the number 2 most anticipated for many people, the Mercedes 190e. Another fantastic one in my opinion when it comes to upgrades, because you can make it into essentially the DTM touring car in those lovely black and grey, or black and silver depending on how you look at it, touring car livery. Like I said before, fantastic rival for the Sierra RS500 and the E30 M3 from that era. Again, lovely to drive. The 190 is not as quick as its legendary status would probably suggest. I believe the real life 0 to 60 is something like 7 seconds, so by today's standards it's not actually as quick as you'd think, but it's lovely to drive in the game. Interestingly, the point level on the Mercedes is actually considerably lower than the point level on even the classic Dodge Charger, which kind of surprised me. I think it's because that acceleration is a little sluggish, but of course tuning can change a lot of that. You can even remove the rear wing, which is something I used to do in Forza. I think it gives it kind of a drift car appearance. You can wide arch kit it even more than it already is. So yeah, pretty awesome car. It's iconic, and of course hugely important from the point of view of Gran Turismo's past, because it now has, for the first time ever in touring car or road car form, an interior. It never had one in Gran Turismo before, as recently as Gran Turismo 6. So seeing it in full HD glory, it's great, of course. It looks lovely. Next up, probably the car that a lot of JDM fans were looking forward to in this particular update. Well, pretty much the only JDM car from the update, so it would be the Nismo. Like I said, very expensive, 1.8 million. The thing that I take issue with this car is that as great as it is, and it is a lovely car to drive, and I'll touch on GT Sophie in just a second because that was the event that I used this one in for this footage. As good as it is, not to toot my own flute here, but it reminds me a lot of what a special projects version of this would feel like. Like if I just took an R33 and tuned it up to Gran Turismo 6 specs and did my own version of a Nismo, it kind of feels so similar to something I would have built in the game that I kind of feel like, okay, like yeah, mine wouldn't have cost 1.8 million either. But yeah, it's great to see it, of course, but if you compare this to like versions of the Mines Evo that I did recently, or the Mines Skyline, it fits in pretty nicely given that I didn't render those cars, I just built them in the game. So again, if you're into this kind of stuff, you should probably check out my special projects series, because there's a lot in there that you'll like if these are the kind of cars that you love. The Nismo's great though. Again, I'll talk about it more in its own review. About 400 horsepower, 1550 kilos. The craziest thing is definitely the price. In terms of driving it, whatever you expect it to be, it is. You know, it's an R33, so you already know what it's going to be like. Next up, the Porsche, the 992 GT3 RS. This one has active aero that you can use, the KERS system, or is it, no, DRS I should say, not KERS, which you can use. I'm using it here at Laguna Seca in one of the career mode events against other ones. Interestingly, no visual upgrades for this Porsche. You cannot wide body it, you can't change any of the aero. I was kind of surprised by that, but it's a pretty aero heavy vehicle to begin with, so it's not the end of the world. Simply put, fantastic car. Even with no tuning whatsoever, this thing is a weapon around the track, and crucially, it's very forgiving. It may even be easier to drive than the Lexus LFA, in fact. It's a lovely car to work with. The GT3 RS just goes from strength to strength throughout each generation of 911. Of course, it was featured in the GT movie as well. I'm sure that was no coincidence, and it's lovely to have it in the game. Of course, another 911 will always roll some people's eyes, but at least you do know it's going to be a hell of a machine. 340,000 credits is actually quite attainable too for something like this. Next up, the classic Dodge Charger. Again, some subtle but very nice visual changes. You can debadge it in effect, taking certain body parts off, changing the wing around. It's a Charger, so again, you know what to expect. At the same time, though, it is technically a debut for Gran Turismo, because although we had the Charger before, a couple of different ones, it was never this one. This is the 68 426 RT Hemi. We had, of course, the 70 shape and the Super B as well, both of which are also gorgeous. Never premiums, though, so they didn't have interiors. This is the first classic Charger to ever have the full HD treatment, and it's kind of ironic to me that we've had a premium Dodge Challenger, the classic one, for a hell of a lot longer than a premium Charger. You would have thought they'd have, prioritized that the other way around, but yeah, it's great to finally have it. You'll see me driving it stock here, so it tops out pretty quick on the transmission, something which of course is kind of a cliche for most American muscle cars back then, but in terms of prices, like I said, it's actually ironically one of the cheapest cars in the update, so if you were looking forward to this one, you'll have a lot of fun for a pretty low price, and of course, it's a muscle car, so power is never an issue. The curious thing about this to me is this one actually has the most notable wide body conversion, and I'll probably show it here in the video because it actually changes quite a lot about the car's look. Initially it looks quite subtle, but when you look at it especially from the back, it almost reminded me of the kind of wide body that something like Need for Speed Carbon would have had, because it's got these huge vent kind of shapes behind the wheels, which is not what I would have expected. It almost looks like the Fast and Furious kind of Charger with the turbine engine on the back. But yeah, surprisingly cool, some great little subtle visual upgrades, removing the headlight covers, stuff like that. And it's a Charger, so of course it's going to have plenty of fans, and if you are, you won't be disappointed. Sticking to Dodge, the Challenger, the SRT Demon. This one could easily have gone either way. It could be horrendous to use, and maybe just wheel spin city in a straight line. It's got some lovely colours, it's 200 grand to buy, so hefty I guess, but not really in Gran Turismo terms. 840 horsepower, nearly 2 tons. It's modern day pure ballistic missile muscle. So, like I said, you know what to expect. The thing that you won't be expecting though is how forgiving it is. You can kick the tail out, you can shred the tyres, but it's actually not difficult to drive at all. It's really forgiving, like to a strange degree, almost to a degree where, as somebody who hasn't driven a real-life Challenger yet, I would be curious to know, is the real car actually this forgiving? I wouldn't imagine so, but if it is, then I guess that's cool. Visual upgrades, there are some. You can change around the wing, a bigger ducktail, you can have more of a chin splitter with the support struts on the front, which is a pretty cool look to it as well. And yeah, it's pretty much what you expect. A really powerful Challenger. So, does what it says on the tin. And last, and well, let's be honest, for most people probably least as well, but actually, you might want to give this car a bit more interest than you might have previously thought, because first of all, it's the cheapest car in the whole patch at 55,000 credits. The Tesla Model 3. And before you tune out mentally, or literally, it's actually a pretty damn good little car. It only weighs just over 1,800 kilos, so it's not quite as heavy as you might have thought. It's not over 2 tons, for example. It is all-wheel drive, or four-wheel drive technically, rather than the rear-wheel drive of the Model S, which was always something that felt so outdated, especially compared to Tesla these days. Over 530 horsepower, and with such a cheap price, as long as you use it in events which don't need pitting in, and which don't need, fuel use, it's actually quite the little weapon. And you can definitely feel that even with some very subtle changes like some weight loss and tyres, even if you just left it to that, it would be a hell of a thing. And the top speed is not anywhere near as much of a limiting factor as it used to be with stuff like the Model S and the Fisker Karma, which they used to struggle to go past 135. This thing can get up around 160 even without doing anything to it. The handling is a little bit on the heavy side, there's a little bit of body roll, and the brakes feel a little bit underpowered. But again, you're throwing it around a track, so you'd kind of expect something like a Model 3 to need some tuning put into it, but give this car a chance. You might be surprised, actually. Teslas aren't the most characterful of cars, and I do say that as somebody who has driven a performance Tesla, but yeah, in the game, at least, it's kind of a hidden weapon. And on the topic of GT Sophie 2.0, which of course is one of the quite rare aspects of this, which is PS5 exclusive rather than PS4, I don't have a huge amount of thoughts on Sophie. It pretty much does what you'd expect it to do, which is up the ante on the AI, make it feel like it has a bit more of a personality. I talked about Sophie when we were using it last time, which was more of a limited run kind of thing. I believe this one is more of a longer term implementation into the game, or at least it seems to be that way for now. My thoughts are that it's definitely an improvement. The cars do act in a little bit less of a predictable way. They kind of get in your way more, they maneuver around you more, they try to avoid you sometimes. The only aspect that I maybe found a little more annoying, and this is something which I find in probably more than just Gran Turismo, but maybe a number of games, is that there always seems to be basically a 1v1 happening, and there's just a ton of other cars in the way. And I'm sure many of you immediately know what I mean, which is that you start at a certain point, such as I did with the Nismo, and then it takes you a while to get past all of these other cars, but it doesn't take a while because you're not quick enough. They get in the way. You know, when you're 3-4 cars abreast on a track that's only so wide, like here at Suzuka, it takes a while to get past many of them unless you want to just cut corners. But then you've got one car that's a good 5, 6, 7 seconds ahead of everything else, and that's the actual car that you're racing against. So I would like to see them maybe rein that in a little bit, because it does feel like it's a bit, you know, like everything else is just there to get in your way, which is less of a challenge and less of a race and more of like more of a task to kind of bump all of these other vehicles out of the way and then actually chase down the leader, because that's not quite as fun when you start to see races panning out that way. At least that's how it came out here. I was surprised actually that even on the harder difficulty you can still reel in that lead car even with the standard Nismo that I was using. I was expecting it to be like, you know, really, really difficult stuff, but I guess they are still trying to appeal to more players. It would be cool to have maybe a fourth option, like beginner, medium, pro, and then like extreme, to have like essentially like you're racing against GT award finalists, which I know for many of us that wouldn't be applicable, but for those who maybe don't get the chance to be in the live events but are just behind them, to be able to actually race against AI that kind of mirrors many of their peers, that would be quite cool. That's something which I wouldn't get any use of out of myself because I'm not fast enough to warrant that, but for those who are interested in that level of competition with the AI, I guess many of those would just race real people, but maybe if they fancy a change or whatever, I think that could be a cool maybe next step for Sophie. And to basically round out my thoughts on the update as a whole, there are new engine swaps available as well. I'm not going to detail every single one of them, you'll see some of them on screen anyway if you pause the video in the notes, but there are 10 this time around, and interestingly and thankfully it's not all just the same kind of thing in terms of the cars that it can be done to. In fact, to highlight some of the 10, you can now engine swap the Lamborghini Huracan, you can engine swap the 2013 Viper, and perhaps surprising of all, most surprising, the surprisingest of all, you can engine swap some of the Group 3 road cars, which is not something I would have expected. And by extension, some of the Group B road cars as well, like the Subaru and the Mitsubishi. I haven't checked out all of the swaps yet. I will be covering them. I may do a completely revised, entire list now that we've got to this milestone of 2.0, combining all of the parts, because that would be part 5 now of the engine swaps directory, so I may as well just put it all together into one video. So again, stick around for that one. And that's pretty much it for my overall thoughts. So a longer review episode than it would usually be, but a lot more to talk about as well. There's definitely more to get into in terms of each vehicle, its spec, its price, what it's good for, etc. So stick around obviously on the channel for that. I will be kicking off tomorrow with the Lexus LFA first of all. I will also be releasing some no commentary videos, some of the gameplay videos which have the PS5 logo in the corner, which will be about 2 or 3 minutes long, just for if you want to see and hear the car in action with no talking over it. And I know some of you like to enjoy those videos. here and there, like for the Aston Valkyrie, etc., that I've done in the past. And of course I will be doing, naturally, one of those for the Lexus LFA tomorrow, probably before the review comes out, in fact. So give me your thoughts down below. Of course, for those who have done the license, which, as I said, is the only aspect I haven't looked into fully, then of course, give me your thoughts down below. Give me your thoughts overall. Are you disappointed? Are you happy with it? And maybe if you're watching this to see if you should come back, what do you think? Do you think it's worth coming back to? For me, it's nice to be able to actually give praise to an update again beyond just, oh, that's a cool car, because this is the kind of updates we should be getting. Because in my opinion, you've really only got 3 options to have a good racing game in terms of a roadmap. Either you make a game that has everything you need to enjoy it from launch, which, let's be honest, unfortunately, no one does that anymore. 2, you should have updates that are paid, like Forza does, but at least means that those updates feel like they're actually more to the game, not a missing part of the game that's added later. The key part of DLC is it needs to be additional content that adds to an already good game, not something that the game relies on as a crutch. And thirdly, the third option, which is what Gran Turismo Sport, I would say, actually did for the most part a better job of, was actually adding free updates, but with regularity and size that makes them feel like you're not waiting around for 2-3 years to have the game that you were hoping to get from launch, especially for those of us who upgraded their entire console to play mostly that game. So in the case of this one, that is why to me this is a good update, because this is the kind of stuff I want to see more from Polyphony. If you are going to roll out a game in this way, you've got to up the ante on the updates, regardless of if they're free, because they weren't free. We funded you already by buying the game. I, for one, don't mind paid DLC at all. I used to buy tons of it for Test Drive Unlimited, Forza, because it felt like it was worth it to me. So overall, that's it for my thoughts this time around. Of course, there's always something to complain about technically, and doubtless the community or certain members of it will find something to. This is a good update. So well done, Polyphony. I'm enjoying it. I'm certainly not finished yet with all of the stuff that there is to do, most notably the licenses. And of course, stick around, like I said, on the channel over the next few days for more. But for now, thanks for watching.